Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So today we are going to be talking about the next quest in 6.3, which in this case is going to be Revolt, the one with Havoc boss, so 6.33. And yeah, overall I do not think it was the worst quest. There are, as always, only 6 paths, and we're going to go through each and every single one of them, and actually none of the paths were that troublesome. There is, however, one extremely ill-designed individual placed in that quest, which is probably one of the bigger banes in your bottom overall in entire 6.3. But so we're gonna start off with the far right path with the mutants primarily placed on it, and that path basically has counter tactics and combo party on it. So overall, it's like pretty much not the worst combination by any means. You are pretty much free to use vast majority of your roster. You just need to be aware that the deeper you are in the fight, when you get punished, it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt a lot. Looking at their PIs, their attacks, plus increased attack from counter tactics and the penalty from combo party. Basically, if you're gonna make a slip up, you're gonna be done for. So also, to avoid the block damage you might get later on in these high health fights, you basically want to use champions that can reliably find openings without a need of kind of relying on parry. But aside from that, it's a fairly straightforward path. Champions that do a lot of damage with a small amount of hits are definitely very good for this. Also, champions that can have like extremely high chance of a perfect block or reduced block damage, like Sunspot, is going to be perfect. Quake is amazing because she doesn't hit opponents, so they don't get any combos on. Like Omega Red can do extremely well just because you can play with very few hits and still do a lot of damage. Ghost can always phase and you don't need to parry to find your openings. So yeah, it's a relatively kind of straightforward, easy path, definitely not the trickier stuff to deal with. And the next path, path number 2, the second one on the right side basically, is Resistor Path with a bunch of immunities. Immune to poison, immune to bleed, immune to armor break. But since it is a Resistor Path, as always, it's extremely cheesable. It's probably the easiest path in the entire quest altogether, because the only thing you need to do is bring in your rank 3 Sig 20 Ronin, and you can just stun lock them for days, and as soon as you launch your first level 1 attack, the fight is pretty much over. Obviously Morningstar is going to do amazing for this, magic, so on and so forth. It's not a difficult path to take on at all, and I think it's pretty much by far the easiest path in entire 6.3 to deal with, because yeah, a rank 3 Ronin will do just fine. Just get to your first level 1, which is a simple task really. Land your level 1 and you're gonna be permanently stun locking all the opponents. And yeah, it's nothing kind of like too difficult or too crazy. Simple fight, simple lane to clear, and the opponents on that lane are not really all the most difficult ones either, so you don't really have much to worry about. If you have a Ronin or like a decent sized Morningstar, it's probably the one you want to head when you do your initial completion run, because it's as easy as it is gonna be in Act 6 anywhere pretty much. Additionally, in a fairly shining example that Kabam don't have much of a clue what players need and don't need help with, and what is in fact difficult or challenging in this game, what isn't. For whatever reason, this Resistor lane also gets a special boost, which basically states whenever a Mystic champion, so yes, it only applies to Mystic champions, whenever a Mystic attacker would nullify a buff on a defender, they are inflicted with degeneration, which is stackable and deals quite a bit of damage and can be refreshed. And yeah, so in case the easiest fight in Act 6 or easiest lane in Act 6 was not easy enough and you want to have some extra amount of fun, you can use this special boost over here and deal more damage whenever you nullify buffs with Morningstar, Magic, Doctor Doom, whichever Mystic character you happen to be using. It's really not needed, but hey, it's there. And now moving on to path number 3. Path number 3 is Armored Assault, Armor, and Burden of Might. So the way Armored Assault works is basically whenever opponent has an armor buff active, their attacks are unblockable and they gain extra attack. Obviously, armor node as such makes it so that all of these opponents will have an armor buff from the beginning of the fight, and burden of the fight makes sure that you have to kind of keep aggressive and keep striking opponent, otherwise you can take more fun and interactive damage. Now, all in all combined, it is not the worst path. There aren't that many tricky opponents, and yes, there are plenty of champions who have armor breaks available in their base kit in order for you to armor break them and then basically fight as normal. It's not a super easy path, but it's nothing too challenging either. Basically, if you're decent at intercepting or use champions that don't rely on parry to find openings, such as Ghost, for instance, or Hyperion, you're gonna have a relatively good time overall. It's not a crazy difficult path. Additionally, Kabam also made a special boost available for this path, and that is the famous Planetary Might boost that has already been nerfed. It affects all Cosmic Champions and basically gives them a flat 25% chance per active buff to inflict armor break on opponent that reduces their armor by 20%, and while its active opponents cannot gain new armor buffs. So this used to say 90%, and this used to turn Corvus into an absolute killing machine. This probably was the best boost available that you could use on any Cosmic Champion at any given time and turn them into an absolute destroyer relative to their original power levels. However, Kabam deemed that to be too good, too beneficial to players, and nerfed it down to 20%. Now, with that nerf, it's kind of like a nice to have boost. It's not going to change anything too drastically. It's going to give some champions easier way to armor break, like Venom. Even though he had an armor break on heavy attack, now you can armor break on your medium attacks, or Angela, or whoever you else might use. But again, now it's just kind of like a nice to have, a slightly helpful boost opposed to what it used to be. So if you're one of those who got to take advantage of this one straight off going in there, good on you. If you missed your chance, then it's a nice to have. And yeah, as you can see here, the path is mainly tech champions with armor buffs, robots, so on and so forth. Nothing too tricky. Now off to the next path. And the next one is fairly simple and straightforward. It is simply Stupefy and Unblockable Finale. So Stupefy means that whenever you get stunned for absolutely forever, and in combination with these attacks in 6.3, you're basically dead. Now, Unblockable Finale is not the most difficult node, let's face it. For 75% of the fight, you can just fight as normal. Last 25% of the fight, opponents are fully unblockable. So good ways to kind of counter it is either to rely on champions that deal huge bursts of damage and time yourself right to kind of like take opponents down to 28% and then finish them off as quickly, as burstly as you can, or rely on champions that don't necessarily need a parry or just play well. Like, honestly, it's not a tricky node, it's not a tricky path, and with the exception of Joe Fixit, all of opponents like level 1 attacks are easy to evade fully, even if they are unblockable. Like, nobody has too much trouble evading Kang's level 1, that being unblockable, so it's not a hard path by any means. And opponents on there: Joe Fixit, Kang, Ronin, Cal Obsidian, Stark Enhanced Spider-Man, I believe the last one is Goldpool. Yeah, straightforward, nothing too tricky, nothing too difficult, no fun and interactive unavoidable damage. So this is in fact one of the easier lanes to complete if you do not have champions that can cheese the resistor node. And now moving on to the path number 5. Path number 5 is full with only Mystic champions and states as follows: has enhanced abilities, so all abilities trigger 20% more often. All special attacks are unblockable. Additionally, there is Tenacity, which I believe is actually a new node, which basically makes every champion into an Agent Venom. Now, this is Tenacity 2, which I believe has 50% potency. However, within enhanced abilities, they will be shrugging off more than half of your debuffs. So yeah, majority of your debuffs and parry stans will get shrugged off. You need to keep that in mind. You need to alter the way you play. But other than that, it's not end of the world. It's not the trickiest path. It's annoying more so than it is challenging, I would say. And yeah, the fact that it's filled with Mystic champions obviously makes Blade a fairly swift killing machine. And even Human Torch can be really good for this lane, especially since all of the champions are Mystics. So you're going to be gaining a lot of Smolders. Fair enough, not all of your Incinerates will stick. In fact, most of them won't. However, you will be gaining Smolders left, right, and center, and the Incinerates that do stick will deal so much more damage. So you can flex your Human Torch here as well. Additionally, if you have him duped and if you use your pre-fight ability as often as possible, those passives cannot be shrugged off, and that will work excellently for you. And yeah, it is not all that difficult of a path, but there is also a special boost available for this path. And again, it's one of those nice to have boosts. It's nothing too crazy. Basically, it is affecting all science champions, and what it states is whenever the defender would shrug off a debuff, you gain an evasion charge, and whenever you would get hit while you're not blocking, you evade their attack and consume that evasion charge. So the more debuffs you apply to opponent, the more evasion charges you have, and the more chance you have to basically be saved from your mistakes. It is quite useful when you take in consideration unblockable special attacks. That can definitely save you from some mistakes, but it's nothing mandatory to be aware of in order to complete this path effectively. Plus, it doesn't really help you deal with opponents shrugging off your debuffs in the first place. It just kind of like gives you a bit of a safety blanket. So it's definitely not a must-have. And now off to the final path. And final path is a bit special one. There is no one set node. Each opponent is different. Each opponent requires different things, different abilities. So we have that famous by now Mysterio and Acid Wash, which is going to be one of the bigger problems. For those of you who do not know, this is a huge problem node. And it is so because of the Acid Wash, mainly because Acid Wash states you will be dealing only 10% of your original damage output unless opponent is either a poison debuff or a poison passive. Now, the problem with that in this situation is the fact that Mysterio is poison immune unless his helmet is cracked. So you basically need the champion that can crack his helmet and poison him. And if you take a look at the current list of Marvel Concept of Champions, then you're going to notice that there are only 2 champions that can armor break and inflict poison. Number 1 is King Groot, who hits like a 7-year-old Girl Scout, and Man-Thing, who is extremely new champion, and also a fairly kind of niche champion, definitely not the crowd favorite. And that, however, means that unless you have one of those 2 specific counters to Mysterio, you will be spending a really, really long time dealing 10% of your original damage output and effectively killing a 3 million health Mysterio, give or take. And yeah, it's probably one of the worst encounters in the entire quest. It's just super annoying. It's maybe not the most difficult, but it definitely feels the cheapest, the most underhanded, the most ill-designed node and champion combination that we can see here, especially when we take in consideration rest of the path, which rest of the path will effectively test all your immunities. You're going to see that there's biohazard, you're going to see that there's going to be EMP modification, you're going to see that there's going to be greater incinerate. So in this lane, you're going to need bleed, poison, shock, incinerate immune champions, and so on and so forth. Plus, then you have to deal with this Mysterio, plus you have to be able to kill the Havoc boss as well. So overall, this is probably the hardest lane in the quest, largely due to that Mysterio. And yeah, it kind of sucks. If you're exploring it, you probably won't leave this till last or close to the finish line. And that just leaves us with the boss pretty much, and the boss of this quest is Havoc. Now, Havoc is never anybody's favorite champion to fight because he's tricky to parry, and obviously he has a lot of very fun nodes such as cornered, so you can't use any damage over time debuffs on him, force of will, which prevents you from reducing his ability accuracy. Extinction Protocol is arguably the worst one though, I think, because eventually he's gonna gain more and more and more power and gonna hit harder and all that good stuff, so you can't even have like a prolonged extended fight because every time he fills a bar of power, he gets the next bar quicker and quicker, and that means that any champion that doesn't finish him quickly will eventually subdue to that and will be unable to control Havoc's power. Additionally, you obviously have improved power gain, which makes him get power even quicker, and crumbling armor, which also kind of makes sure that you can't rely on your armor buff champions if you're not playing aggressive or in a fairly set way. Now, that being said, there are no regeneration abilities and very minimal damage mitigation due to Extinction Protocol, so that means you can just chip him away with whatever you have available. Use your smarts, bait out heavy attacks that will consume his plasma charges, try and push him to level 2 always so he consumes his own charges that way, and then you can use pretty much any champion to kind of like deal some damage to him. Obviously, most notably, there are some really good options against this boss. Colossus will do really well. My rank 4 Colossus was not able to solo him because again the fight was dragging on too long and eventually he just gained far too much power far too quickly. But then you have like your regular armor up champions that if you keep aggressive are safe from those detonations, such as Angela and Warlock and Guillotine 2099. You can always utilize the power drain champions, which will help you substantially as well, like OG Vision, so on and so forth. So there are a fair decent amount of answers, and even if you do not have the perfect counter, you will be able to get this boss down, in my opinion, without wasting too much resources if you kind of know what you're doing and if you have fought a Havoc before. But yeah, that will pretty much do for this quest, and the quest itself is probably one of the easier ones in 6.3. Aside from that last lane, aside from that Mysterio, it's nothing too complicated to deal with. Now, I do hope this video has helped you to understand this quest a bit better, potentially save you some items and resources, and if you think it did, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that sub button, share this video with your alliance mates, maybe they can appreciate some help as well, and I would definitely greatly appreciate your help. That being said, that will be it for today, and I'm gonna catch you guys soon. See ya!